Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to a brand new movie review. I'm Chris Garner, joined tonight with Tayte in the Hour to give our review on Pixar's long-awaited and eagerly anticipated sequel, The Incredibles 2, 14 years in the making. I was at the cinema for the first movie, and that just astounds me that it's been 14 years at this point. This is, of course, Brad Bird returning as writer-director, along with all your favorite characters from the first movie. And yeah, this is going to be a fun review because we've spoken a little bit about our initial responses to the movie and everything like that. And I think we're going to be on opposite sides of the fence on this one tonight.
I think so as well. If you'd like to know, Chris is the buzzkill as always and did not enjoy the film.
You know what?
I'm still young at heart and down with the kids, so I really enjoyed this film.
Hopefully not too down with the kids. This was actually a very awkward viewing experience for me going to the cinema to this one. Like, one for Incredibles 2, please. How old are you? I'm 25.
But no, I'd say this now. The Incredibles 1 was not just a film for kids, not just a film for families, but just a film for absolutely anyone. It's the best version of the Fantastic Four we're ever going to get. No point in saying we've ever had, because we're never going to get a version that is as good as the first Incredibles movie. It has Pixar's possible best villain that they've ever had in the shape of a tormented...
Syndrome?
Yeah!
Is Pixar's greatest villain? Are you insane?
One of the best. I note how I said one of the best.
Okay.
I'm willing to say he's at least in the top 3. He is conniving, he's like flawed, and yet he's completely understandable in his methods. And I think he perfectly kind of symbolized what the first film was going for. That the efforts of one, if the efforts of an entire family against one crazed madman fan is better. This film, I saw the trailers when they first came out. I wasn't overly excited. I was a little bit held back, and that's just because the first film was so good and so enjoyable. So I went into this film with not high expectations, but kind of middle kind of expectations. And we know that Pixar haven't exactly had a great run of form recently. I mean, Coco was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Like, I completely understand why it won the Oscar. I would have hoped that Loving Vincent won it more, as it was a bit more progressive, but that's an argument for another day. The Good Dinosaur was... Let's be honest here, forgettable, completely forgettable. And Cars 3 was downright bad. Not as bad as Cars 2, but still, they've been kind of dipping up and down recently. And I just thought that this one stabilized Pixar a bit more. And it's not as good of a story as the first one. But the character development involved from the characters from the first film, if you don't look at it like a 14-year wait and instead like watch one and then watch the second immediately afterwards, it feels like nothing has changed and the story's just continued, and I really enjoy that. Right,
okay, so your biggest positive there in that it's a direct continuation is actually my biggest negative. But before I get onto that, I'll go back and say what I thought on the first Pixar, on the first Incredibles movie. Incredibles came out after a time we'd had Toy Story 1, Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters, Inc., and Finding Nemo, all of which are films I absolutely love and had a big connection to as a kid. The Incredibles came out, and whilst I didn't hate it as a kid, and I think George was the same with me on this one, I think when we did our Pixar discussion video, we weren't drawn to Incredibles as much as everyone else was. There was something about it that didn't quite land with us. And as I said, we didn't hate it, but it didn't quite hit the heights of the previous Pixar movies.
I'll say for the film, it's aged incredibly well.
Yes,
it really has.
It has, yeah. And this is what I was going to go on to, in that Incredibles has definitely improved the older I've got. You kind of analyze it more. You look at it, as you said, like the whole Fantastic Four thing. The family dynamic was really... I don't know if it was a unique thing, but the interplay between the family was very believable because you could like watch it as like a real life family and also larger than life with all these superpowers. And it's actually a very good film when I've watched it again. It usually comes on around Christmas. I usually catch it, and it is one that I do enjoy, and I tend to find something new or like a joke or some kind of gag every time I watch it. The second one was coming out, and I mean, this was in development for ages. Brad Bird was in interviews saying that we will get a sequel at some point, but the story's just got to be just right or equal, if not better, to the first movie. And years go by, and we get the likes of Finding Dory, we get Monsters University, we get a Cars 2 and 3. Let me just stop right there for a second, saying that we have a complete Cars trilogy before we got an Incredibles 2. That absolutely blows my mind. It should completely be the other way around, but I digress. We've had a lot of Pixar sequels come out that haven't been good. And it's honestly been the sequels, with the exception of the Toy Story sequels, it's been the sequels that have knocked Pixar down considerable pegs in terms of the animation industry. Still put out great films out there. You still have the likes of Inside Out and Coco. It's mostly their original movies that are really fantastic and which really like bring me back to Pixar every now and then. But like when that company started off, as I said, like their first 5 or 6 movies, they were completely untouchable. And now, unfortunately, it seems like they have got into like the sequel route. So I was apprehensive when Incredibles 2 was announced, and then trailers started to come out. And right from the off, I see that Jack is still a baby. I see that Dash is still the same age. I see that Violet's still the same age. And it's a direct continuation with the Underminer, for example. That's not a spoiler, he's in the trailer. And that really drew me out the movie. I thought that, and this is kind of, if I go into my review of the movie, I was very, very bored by this movie. And it felt like the easiest possible product they could put together for a sequel to this movie. It didn't feel like it had a particularly inspired story to tell. It felt very retread on a lot of, you know, issues and topics and story beats that were established in the first movie. And I can picture it now. Like, I'm sure Brad Bird must have thought at some point to set this movie 10 years in the future. Where are the parents in 10 years' time? They were already like aging, like middle-aged in the first one and struggling to get back into the superhero game. Where are they 10 years down the line? What are Dash and Violet doing now? Like, he was, you know, a little kid, like he'll be into his teenage years, maybe into his like, you know, 20s now. What's he doing? What kind of character is he? And Jack is now 10 years old, like struggling to control all of his powers and everything like that. To me, that would have been a much more compelling, interesting, and new, unique story to tell with these characters. Instead, my opinions on this movie is they settled for the lowest common denominator and just got a fun kids action flick out there, which is fine. But after a 14-year wait, I can't help but thinking this can't be the best they could have come up with for this film.
Chris, are you not aware of Pixar sequels?
I'm very aware of Pixar.
Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 2, I'm going to assume and say that they're set less than a year apart.
I would say a couple of years apart. There's a big jump between
then
Andy.
Toy Story 3 is 10 years on.
Yes, and it was interesting, right?
Cars 1 and Cars 2 are set directly after each other, if I'm correct in saying.
Somewhere like that, yeah, I can't remember.
And yet Cars 3 is set 5 or 6 years in the future past that. Because he's moving on to his retirement, so it would be at least 5, 6 years, maybe even more than that. Incredibles 1, Incredibles 2, directly sequels of each other. Chris, you've just gone and pitched what exactly they're going to do when they complete the trilogy, which I reckon they'll probably... They're going to complete the trilogy probably 2021, 2022. But it's going to be 10 years on. It's going to be looking at them in the future and stuff like that. I think with this one, they needed to develop the characters within the family more. They needed to kind of develop the situation of, are superheroes still accepted more? And they definitely take to that in this. And they've built up the universe to a point now where we could see a large jump in time and kind of understand where the end product is going to be. I'll have to say, as far as the Underminer is concerned, I'm pretty sure there was a game, Rise of the Underminer,
Rise of the Underminer, PS2,
tied up all of the kind of ties that was needed with that. And I was surprised when they said, okay, we're going to start off with the Underminer now. That kind of got me thinking like, oh, okay, that's a bit unusual. You didn't have to do that, and you could have maybe said it after the Underminer case. But it worked okay. It put them in a situation where they are homeless, where they are out of money, and the system is being shut down, which is really where the film starts.
Well, this whole the big sort of driving topic and through line of this movie is the fact that, do we need superheroes? Are they more of a hindrance than good? And again, I thought that was a topic that had been like nipped in the bud with the first movie.
No, the first movie was all about just a fan of superheroes wanting to be one and then deciding that everyone should be one so that he doesn't feel alone. It was driven by his own self-depression, I'd say, syndrome.
Okay.
He was driven by his own self-needs. Without going into spoilers, this film does play heavily on the superhero outlaw kind of situation and plays quite heavily into the idea that they want to push forwards after the first kind of the syndrome incident. They want to push the law forward so that superheroes can be allowed back into society, allowed to protect. But there are still a lot of people who disagree due to the other hazards that come across with superhero work. So the destruction, the damage. If a supervillain gets away, what do they do then? Like it's playing into the fact that even if you have a superhero who could save lives, it still can make it dangerous, and it plays off that point very heavily during this film.
I see. For me, like I thought those threads were tied up with the big ending fight of the first Incredibles movie. You've got citizens in peril.
You have to remember that the agreement to ban superheroes is global, and not all the superheroes are in America. Believe it or not, Americans. And that is one situation seen by a few people in one city. Okay. That's just the general public watching it. And this also isn't a spoiler, but they kind of introduce the idea of the superheroes wearing cameras just so that they can show the world that they can be safer and how they actually go about their job and the risks that they take during their kind of position and stuff like that. So they're making steps to move it forwards because the first film was very small scale, whilst this film tries to make it a little bit more, not globalized, but at least kind of a broader scope as far as where the heroes could protect.
Yeah. So we already disagree on that part. There's one other thing I want to talk about before getting on to my biggest negative of this movie. And it's the role reversal. It's the exact same thing as the first movie, but role reversed. In the first movie, you had Mr. Incredible being all secretive, going off on like these secret espionage missions as a superhero, whilst Elastigirl had to stay home, be the stay-at-home mum, look after the kids, and also kind of juggle her own superhero identity. This movie, they just reverse it. You've got Elastigirl going out doing all these secret ops missions. You've got Mr. Incredible being the stay-at-home dad, trying to control everything whilst also wrestling with his own superhero identity. It was the exact same story as the first one. And I can't help but think the reason they kept them, did a direct sequel, kept them all the same age, was that you could have all the exact same tropes. You could have the mischievous, like, schoolboy Dash. You could have the angsty identity crisis kind of thing with Violet, and you could also have cutesy Jack Jack. In fact, you could probably rename this movie from Incredibles to Jack Jack the spin-off.
I'd say like Jack Jack, it really is a massive Deus Ex Machina in this film, and is slightly overused, especially seen as
overused.
In the first film, there wasn't really powers discovered until the final 5-10 minutes, whilst in this film, every single situation where Jack Jack is in a scene, Jack Jack will use a power which will randomly allow the scene to be flipped on its head.
Yeah.
And I personally think that was a little bit overplayed.
Yeah, totally.
Hopefully, if they jump it 5 or 10 years in the future, I think you've hit it on the head straight away by saying it needs to be a power struggle. And possibly that Jack Jack could very easily be the villain here in another film.
See, that would be really cool. And if they'd have done that, that would be a really good angle to go with it.
When they said there was going to be an Incredibles 2, it was set 10 or so years afterwards, my immediate first thought was Dash is going to be the villain. Because he wants to kind of break off from the family. He wants to be rebellious and stuff like that. He's going through a phase, and he maybe encourages a crime wave or something like that. And it would be the rest of the family trying to take down, or at least bring like Dash to his senses. But if you have a person who can't even control their own powers in the sense of Jack Jack, that would be a difficult villain to tackle, because Jack Jack doesn't want to be evil. Jack Jack doesn't want to go and do all of these different powers and stuff like that.
But he just can't control it.
But at the same time, it isn't a hindrance in any scene which matters. It's only a help. If it became a hindrance, then there would be a bit more danger. If it was a bit more randomized instead of random powers, but there's a reason behind every single one of them, it makes it a little bit kind of too heavy a crutch to lean on as far as the film's concerned.
What it felt like to me is like, and I agree with that. Like, I think that would have been a great angle to go with, actually. Like, have like a 10-year-old be the villain, but he just can't control these powers, and he actually might be the most powerful superhero in the world. That would have been a great angle to go with it. It felt like to me that all the characters, the main core characters of the family, it was all a complete step back compared to where they ended that first movie. Like Violet ends that first movie.
Violet was underused in this film.
Violet was the very shy, timid, you know, sort of like angsty teenage girl, like kind of like the wallflower. And by the end of the movie, she kind of comes into her own through her superpowers, through this mission. She makes the first move and asks the guy out. She's like, how about we go and see a movie? I'll buy the popcorn. See you then. And she kind of comes into her own. In this movie, right from the off, complete regression back to exactly how she was in the first movie. Dash as well. He was the mischievous kid at school. He was trying to get noticed. He realized that he had all this potential that wasn't being nourished, that wasn't being nurtured, and he felt really repressed by that. And then through the actions of the family and the mission, he comes into it, but he knows when to dial it back and when to control it. In this movie, he's right back to being like crazy, annoying, bratty kid again, like he was at the start of the first movie. Everyone seemed to take a step back. Because it's like the classic Disney thing, like when Disney don't want to take a chance, when they want to bank on the safe and the known, you know, throw Jack in there, throw all the same ingredients that everyone loved for the first one. Everyone loved Edna Mode, right? We've got to get her in like a cameo that's kind of pointless to the movie.
She could have been used a lot better than she was in her scene.
Yeah, and I guess we can't say what the scene is. Like, I guess we're still doing spoiler-free, and we'll get to spoilers later on down the line. But yeah, no, everything felt like regression. Now, onto my biggest negative with this movie. See, I didn't even really like Syndrome. Like, I liked the backstory they went with it. I just didn't think he was a very imposing villain. But oh boy, this movie had a villain problem in that the villain was absolutely atrocious. And I'm not talking about the Underminer. I'm talking about the new villain, Screenslaver. Really, really weak villain. Terrible, terrible villain. Predictable outcome, predictable reveal. It felt like I was watching a Scooby-Doo cartoon.
The reveal was predictable, and there's one scene which it would have fixed this villain. One scene or one bit of direction which would have helped. Screenslaver makes a speech about exactly halfway into the film, explaining why, like, the character is doing what they're doing, and explains kind of what the purpose and the function of Screenslaver is, and what their eventual goal is to do. And this scene is not focused on Screenslaver. This scene is focused on Elastigirl. And it's focused on Elastigirl hunting down this location of Screenslaver. If you actually listen to the speech that was made, it makes some valid points. It makes some extremely interesting points about modern day society and stuff like that. But it's all background noise because everyone's focused on what's happening on screen. What you have there is the villain's motivations being spelled out and it being completely ignored. You could have a villain just like the first film where they're front and center, they're a bit cocky, they're a bit egotistic, whilst this one was kind of sitting in the background, kind of lying in wait.
Yeah.
And it made sense for where the eventual villain kind of ended up and how they were able to kind of take control. But all you needed was all eyes on the screen and all eyes on Screensaver for that moment. That would have at least allowed you to understand where they were coming from in their eventual end goals, instead of it being the big reveal to do so. So at least you know why it was happening from the midpoint of the film, and it would leave a bit more of mystery up to how it would be resolved. That's down to direction. That's not down to anything other than direction, because the script is there and they just decided, okay, we want to focus more on the Incredibles family instead of a villain here.
Yeah.
How do we do that? Okay, when the villain is spelling out their end purpose, end goal, why don't we have what's it called? Elastigirl going and hunting them down, whilst all these speeches, which everyone else, I mean, Screensaver's whole purpose is meant to be, oh, you're meant to keep watching the screen. I'm meant to tell you what to do and stuff like that, hypnosis and everything like that. And yet we're not hypnotizing that scene.
Mm-hmm.
We're not hearing exactly what we want to hear. We're not hearing what the eventual end goal is going to be.
Yeah, and it definitely like muddied the character and the motivation, everything like that. I just didn't think the character was that interesting to begin with. Brinsley's go on, sorry.
Yeah, the idea of hypnosis as a weapon is quite inventive. I like that. And the way that the character went about it, using screens as a device to get control of people in the various different situations, it's good.
Do you know what it kind of reminded me of?
Go on.
Remember the bit from Man of Steel where Zod's like patching through and like all the devices go on to like static and it's his voice? It really reminded me of that every time it went into that screen.
It could have been handled better. Let's go with the Brinsley comment then.
Yeah, so Brinsley's put, I know this is for kids, but the story was very predictable. I knew who they were going to fight as soon as they were introduced. I still like Edna, though. That's Brinsley's comment there. And SeaWorld Man 879 says, I thought 2 was better than the first. I will disagree there. I think that the first one, I usually like the first movies in a series anyway, because it sets up and it always seems like it's the most self-contained, solid story.
Yeah.
I'm coming down like thunder on this movie, and now don't get me wrong, this is no Cars 2, this is no Cars 3, it's nowhere near that bad. It's still a solid watch, but I've got to be honest, it's like 2 hours long. I knew exactly where it was going to go. It was really predictable. I was kind of bored with this movie. It felt like I'd seen it all before. And I have seen it all before in The Incredibles 1, and it was done better in Incredibles 1. I honestly don't think that this was a very strong script throughout, and I think that they threw in a lot of cutesy shit. Very, very minor spoiler. There's a part where the movie just stops dead in its tracks for like a 5-minute sequence of Jack having a fight with a raccoon.
Yes, that could have been. They could have done it similar to the way they did Jack Attack with that scene.
Yeah. I was
Jack Attack was exactly that scene. They played exactly the same scene with just a different person there.
And the brilliant thing with Jack Attack was that was almost like kind of a deleted scene. Like you could have put that in the movie and had like a 5-minute extended scene, but why didn't you put that in the movie? Because it would have slowed the pacing down. It would have stopped the movie dead in its tracks. Remove that scene, have it as a DVD extra, and it's fine. It felt like a DVD extra put into the movie.
This isn't a spoiler, I hope. I really hope this isn't. Would this film have been better if Mr. Incredible had tried to sneak out and help out with the situation? Would it have made the villain's point and purpose correct, and would have made it a bit more like, okay, we understand your point here, we understand why you're doing this? Would it have also put more strain on the relationship that is built up in the film, and maybe added a different element of, okay, Mr. Incredible, look, he wants to help out the family, but he's still quite self-centered from his superhero days? Would that have fixed the film?
I don't know if it would have fixed the film. I think it would have moved the plot on nicely, because honestly, that whole stay-at-home dad thing takes up so much of the running time of this movie. And like, you can do that. You can have that stay-at-home dad thing, but like just have it as a beat in the story and then move it on after that, you know? But it felt like it hogged so much of the runtime. So maybe I don't know. I don't think that would have saved the movie for me, because ultimately that kind of does happen towards the end anyway. Spoiler.
It happens towards the end, but would it have worked better?
I think it would have just moved things on.
When Elastigirl's trying to make out on her own, and she's been asked to kind of use the programs of that, if Mr. Incredible had come in and made the situation worse, like someone had got harmed or something like that because he'd gone and meddled in when he was asked not to,
maybe,
and would have been changed and would have put more tension towards the ending. I'm not going to say what the ending is, or at least the ending, the final third of the film. Would it have put more tension on the event at the end of the film, because the ramifications, the political ramifications within the film's universe of what had happened would have been more of a strain on what they were striving for?
maybe, but like, and again, I want to try and stay away from spoilers as much as possible. I think that beat was already kind of shown within the first opening action scene of this movie, and I don't know if sort of doing something similar to that again would have just sort of belabored the point and just like, you know, repeated another story beat. I'm not sure. Maybe it would have added to the tension between him and his wife, Elastigirl, perhaps. But I don't know if that would have saved the movie. I'd have to. Ultimately, I'd have to see it in a final movie to see whether it would have dragged the pacing down or if it would have, you know, helped improve it. Brinsley's done a top comment again, and I completely agree with this. I think I would be less critical of this movie if it came out like a year or so after Incredibles 1, but they had all this time to do something interesting. That's kind of what I'll agree with. Moving away from the story beats, because we'll talk much more about that in the spoiler review, I want to talk about the actual animation itself. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't like the animation style in this one. Now, I was doing like a little bit of reading on like development of this movie, and I kind of saw this from the trailers in that the characters don't quite look how they did in the first one. They look a lot more cartoony, if I can say that. And what the designs of this new one remind me of are when you see those old style posters and like those trophies that Mr. Incredible had on his wall, like that kind of memorial to him, not memorial, that you know, that shrine to himself almost. The animation of the characters kind of mirrored that art style, the 2D art style that you see like throughout like the opening credits and the end credits and stuff like that. It looked more cartoony that way. And I didn't like it. And I found out that all the old systems that they used for the first Incredibles movies, they've completely got rid of now. I guess they're completely outdated, being in 2004. They had to rebuild all of the characters from scratch for this movie. I don't know. It just, some of the textures and the actual design looked way more cartoony than they did in the first movie.
There was one fight scene where it felt a little bit jarring, and that was the screensaver
fight. Yeah,
that was a bit jarring, but that was like strobe lighting at the time, so it kind of made sense. As far as the animation is concerned, it's not the best that Pixar's done, but it's definitely not the worst.
Yes.
We're not talking kind of like the jarringness that was The Good Dinosaur with the beautiful water textures and the terrible animation of the actual dinosaurs itself.
And I will say, though, you can definitely see that with how far technology has come in terms of animation since 2004, whilst the action scenes were still great in the first one, the camera angles they managed to get with this one. There's a scene in the movie, for example, with Elastigirl on a motorbike where she's given chase, and the camera angles are absolutely insane and how it follows through the city. So in terms of the fluidity of that, you can definitely see there's been an advancement, but it was mostly just in terms of the characters that it didn't quite match the style of the first one to me.
Okay. Before we go into spoilers, would you recommend this film?
I will just say one last thing as well. Michael Giacchino, the score's still great on this one.
Score is absolutely perfect.
Exactly the same style, like that really loud and kind of jazz music, brass and everything.
Yeah, even if I know that Chris didn't enjoy this film as much as I did, but the aesthetic is still there from the first film. It still feels like an Incredibles film. Even if Chris thinks that it feels like less of an Incredibles film.
I like the timeless feel of it as well. Yeah. In that we're assuming that this takes place in a modern world, but the way that people dress, it reminds me a lot of Christopher Reeve's Superman, how everyone's in suits and like the hats, you know what I mean? Everyone has like a connected like phone and like the old style phones. You never really see anyone on mobile all the time in the film. And it does give it kind of like a timeless, old school comic book feel akin to like those old Superman comics, which I do like about it.
Okay, as a quick side note to allow people to turn off if you haven't seen this film for spoilers, we'll just give a very, very quick description of the short film that was played beforehand called Bao.
Yes.
Wow. The synopsis of it is a Chinese-Canadian woman suffering from an empty nest syndrome gets a second shot at motherhood when one of her handmade dumplings comes alive. Having that explanation would have been very useful going into this film because both me and Chris thought it was incredibly creepy, unwarranted, and at one point very, very dark, possibly the darkest, one of Pixar's darkest moments. Like, it was dark.
Hey, this the short movie before Incredibles 2 got applause in my cinema from like one person, and I don't know if that one person was a kid or not, but like everyone laughed at that one person who was clapping at the screen. Honestly, like the short films that play before all the Pixar movies are actually my favorite part of the movie because
the best one that I've seen is Piper.
Piper was amazing. Yeah,
that was phenomenal.
Yeah. There's been another bunch of good ones as well throughout the time. I actually think Disney have started doing animated shorts now before the classics come out. But Pixar kind of established that whole thing. Yeah, it was very strange because I always go in cold. Like, I don't know if there's any sort of information out there. And I'm guessing there was because I think Incredibles 2 has been out for a while in the US, at least like advanced screenings and stuff like that. But I didn't follow anything about the short film of this. It's a very strange message at the end of the movie, and I get what it was trying to say.
Here's the message: don't eat your son.
See, you hit the end of the short film, and you kind of see what it was doing in that was probably like a visual metaphor for the past between, like, the strained relationship between the mother and son.
She straight up eats her son. She straight up eats her son, and I'm not joking here. That's legit what happens in this short film. I go and go watch it because it is the weirdest fucking thing. And there was a physical gasp from the entire cinema when she eats her own son. And
Brinsley's just
I ate a baby.
Yeah, I was gonna say Brinsley's just killed it in the comments.
It is, like, if you can go find it on YouTube or something like that once it comes out, oh my god, it's
very nicely animated and kind of like funny and sweet in some parts, but you've got to get over the fact that like a dumpling comes alive and like sprouts legs and starts crying and it kind of looks like the mandrake from Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets a little bit, and it looks kind of weird and very unnatural.
So I just want to point out, she puts it in her mouth to start off with, and when it's first born, and then she decides to eat it later. I reckon she got a taste for it and was like, yeah, go for it. Let's go for it. I will eat my son when he comes of age, matured.
So I guess that's our intermission between us.
We've got some more. The dumpling son managed to pull a good wife. Good job, dumpling son.
Dumpling son.
I didn't even want to think of the kind of how that would even work between the dumpling and that woman, but like,
so we had Daniel's son and Dumpling's son. It was strange. It was fine. It's not the worst short film I've seen Pixar do.
No.
It was fun. It was amusing. I just want to know who came up with that idea, and it was probably on the end credits.
Chris, that's probably going to win the Oscar. Let's be honest here.
Probably will. It's Pixar, isn't it? It's Pixar or Disney. They always tend to win it. But that'll do it for our review on Incredibles 2. Spoiler-free review on Incredibles 2 and the short film. We probably should have opened with a short film, in all honesty. But let's get in. Yes, let's get into the spoiler stuff now for Incredibles 2. In all honesty, I don't know how much I have to say on the spoiler stuff, but I know it's probably like linked with the ending and the actual reveal of the villain. So if you haven't seen Incredibles 2 and you are still meaning to see it, you are still interested in seeing it, close off this review, go watch Incredibles 2 first, come back to us so that we don't give anything away or spoil anything for you. So, Tate, what do you want to talk about first in terms of spoilers for this movie?
I would like to talk about Screenslaver reveal. Quick question. Did she have to reveal herself at that time? No. I mean, Elastigirl hadn't worked out that it was her. Hadn't even worked out that it would have been internal. Hadn't even worked out anything. So why did she act so quickly?
Because the plot required the climax to like take place immediately.
It was.
It felt like it was me, Austin. It was me all along.
I want to also just finally say, because I don't really have too many thoughts on the spoilers of this actual film. I quite liked what's his face? Soul. I'm just going to call him Soul because everyone knows him. Soul Goodman.
He looked like Soul. His voice by Soul.
Yep, I quite liked his character. I think he's going to be Winston Dever. I think he's going to be a huge part of the next film when it gets released, as he really is kind of foreheading the superhero movement here. Samuel L. Jackson was good as normal. That's just kind of expected.
It's nice to see Frozone. Frozone's always good.
Frozone's always good. Spin-off film, please, for the love of God.
But like they do repeat a lot of things, and I'm going to link it to Edna Mode in a minute because like I want to talk about that scene with Edna Mode. But a lot of the things did feel it's always the law of diminishing returns, right? There's a video, I can't remember which review it was. I think it was like a Hobbit review or something. He talks about the law of diminishing returns and he compares it to Pirates of the Caribbean. First Pirates of the Caribbean movie, you had the why is the rum gone joke, and everyone loves it, and it was great, and it was a great comedic moment. In the second one, he's like, why is the rum always gone? And you might get a laugh out of it like here and there. Then when they repeat it in the third one, it's just not funny anymore. So, for example, Frozone's wife, which is without a doubt one of my favorite jokes in the first movie, when they throw in her again, like in the background, it feels like a checklist. Like this is what people love in the
first of all, we got confirmation that her name was Honey.
Yes, yeah,
which is that's quite funny. But other than that, it was just kind of I guess people would have demanded it. Let's be honest here. It was such a huge part of the first film and probably the funniest moment of the first film. So having a small cameo, not even if it's a funny one, just hearing her voice again. It was needed. It was always going to happen. It was needed. The Edna Mode, the scene itself was.
It didn't really need. It didn't need to be in the movie. It didn't because if
it showed off one of Jack-Jack's powers, which we hadn't seen before, which was stupid.
Yeah,
a really stupid power. But could have ram.
Oh, we have lost the audio from Tayte. Tayte's audio has completely gone. So I don't know. Comment if Tayte's audio's cut out. It's cut out on my end. So I guess I'm just going to continue a bit until he comes back. The Edna Mode scene for me, don't get me wrong, I love the character of Edna Mode, but the whole like cameo and like scene of her in this movie, and she's actually not in the movie an entire lot. Yeah, Brinsley's just put man down, man down. Yeah, we've lost Tayte at the moment. It looks like his microphone's muted.
Hello.
He's back. He's back.
Hey.
I was under the impression from the first movie, and correct me if I'm wrong, didn't Edna Mode create a super suit for Jack for that first movie?
Yes, like, and he already predicted that he could survive absolutely anything from the super suit. And the super suit would be able to survive anything.
Yeah, and machine washable, darling. That's a new feature. Like, I remember that bit. Like, it was the little baby suit, and it was like crawling with like the, you know, like it was in like a robot thing, and it was like as she was demonstrating the suits to Elastigirl. He had a suit. Why did he need a new suit? Was that ever established? Because we needed a fun Edna Mode Jack cameo. That's why.
Yeah,
that's all it felt like to me. And you're right with that power. He has this power where doesn't he inflate like no, he sets on fire and the suit kind of discharges this sort of like, you know, like fire extinguisher foam thing,
foam that you can eat,
which is really just like complete. Like there's a moment where it goes off and there's guards about to run into the room, and then when the guards get in there, there's no evidence of him. Wouldn't that like all be on the floor, like the foam still be on the floor like it was earlier in the movie? Because he was like eating it at the start, like I think she said like the foam was edible or something and delicious. And then there's also a moment later on where Jack turns absolutely huge. Never happened at any other point in the movie. It's completely he never uses it again. After that point, he never defeats any enemies while he's big. He just kind of breaks through the wall. I don't know. There's just a lot of like.
If we're writing a film here for Incredibles 3, can we have a X-Men: The Last Stand moment? And I know I just said that film name. Can we have an X-Men: The Last Stand moment where we can have Elastigirl or Mr. Incredible as the Wolverine character, and we have Jean Grey, which is Jack, stood up somewhere, and one of them stabbing Jack to finish off.
You talked about.
I love you.
Well, you know, like the short movie before this film did have child murder in there, technically. So,
yeah,
we could do it. I don't know whether they could do it with like an infant son. I thought you were going to go with the whole thing where, like, Jack goes insane and starts levitating like Mr. Incredible and just like dissolves him completely, like Professor X. Maybe they could do that.
Just have Jack. Pick up the Infinity Gauntlet and see what happens.
and then it's like, did you do it? Yes.
Did you do it?
Well, he does go purple in this movie, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rage
Oh,
monster.
let's do it. Let's do it. There are a few and I guess
finite.
Oh man, oh no, oh god. Okay, what was I going to say? I've lost my trail of thought now.
Wait, Chris, he's already got the what's it called, the space stone, because he can go into the next dimension.
That's true.
He's almost there.
So he'd have the power one, he'd have the reality one, and he'd have the space, right?
Fuck, that already makes him the most powerful being in the universe.
The most powerful toddler in the universe.
Oh, that's great.
What was I going to say? I guess the benefit of the script of this movie in some parts, there are only a few like little references here, is the fact that since 2004 we have had a slew of superhero movies and they have really come into their own.
That's maybe why they released the film when it did.
There's a couple of references in there, like there's a moment where Elastigirl gets a new costume and she doesn't really like it. She thinks it's not as like bright and colorful, and they say like, oh, it's like this new darker look, like why does everything have to be dark? Kind of maybe a slight little dig at DC there. Don't get me wrong, it's not like a Deadpool thing where all these references are like really blatant. It's just something I thought about, and maybe that was like an influence on Brad Bird having all these superhero movies come out in between. I think he even said that.
Possibly.
So we like hit the end of this movie and it feels like we're right back at the end of the first one, because it felt so much like a retread. It feels like we end the characters in exactly the same place where they were, like the whole family's together, they've still got to fight crime, and it even ends on kind of a similar stinger to the first movie where a new supervillain shows up, or like a crime's in progress, so they have to drop their family things and to go off and fight crime again. And it just kind of ends on like a real whimper, like, because it feels been there, done that. The giant sort of like, well, not like a huge thing, but there is something that's open-ended with the movie, and that's the fate of the Underminer. So they fight him at the beginning of the movie. That's kind of your open action scene, and he escapes. I did stay in for the entire ending credits, and whilst there isn't an ending credits scene, the animation of like the background of the credits, you do see like a little Underminer little wagon thing like drive over the hills and sort of like bury under the floor. So maybe the Underminer's still out there, and when we eventually get to Incredibles 3. Whether the Incredibles 3 is going to be another 14 years before that comes out, I don't know. I think this movie's made a lot of money. It's going to make a hell of a lot of money. It will definitely probably cross 1 billion because people love Pixar. People love The Incredibles, so I think we'll definitely get an Incredibles 3 probably within the next 5-6 years, I would assume.
Let's hope that they do set it off in the future.
Yeah, I don't think they will. I honestly don't think they will. I think, especially now they've established this with the second film and the characters are exactly the same age, I honestly don't think they're going to age them up. I think that would be too jarring. Had they have aged them up in this movie and done a 10-year jump, and then maybe the third movie do like another 10-year jump, that would have been it. That would have been a really interesting trilogy. I mean, you went back to Toy Story. Would Toy Story 3 have had the same effect had it have just been still a young Andy?
No chance, none.
Exactly, and the reason that I love Toy Story 3 so much, and I stand by that the Toy Story sequels are really good. I don't like them as much as the first movie because I have that nostalgia to the first Toy Story movie.
I'm a fan of 2. I think 2 is the better film.
A lot of people like 2. A lot of people like 2, but I think because Toy Story was such an important film to me as a kid, I think that's why the first one will always be near and dear to me. 2 did ramp it up, but 3 had a story to tell. It had an emotional story to tell, and it had an interesting one. It put, like a whole different paradigm on what was going on, the relationship between the toys and Andy, and the status quo of the film. And I think that's what you could have had with this movie too. Had you have set it 10 years in the future, the entire structure of the family would have changed. Maybe Elastigirl and Mr. Incredible are retired now, like another 10 years, that would put them into their mid-50s maybe, or their 50s or something like that. Maybe they have to hang it up. Maybe Dash and Violet would have
having them retire in the next film, and having Dash and Violet taking over, and possibly even Jack kind of coming into his own, would be a way forward, I guess. But you'd have to. I don't see a way that The Incredibles 3 could work without there being, even if there's a small jump forward in time, it can't be a direct, straight move on. It just can't.
I think it's
having Violet possibly settle down with Tony and move away from the family, and having Dash kind of in his high school kind of phase where he's starting to date girls and stuff like that, and having Jack kind of being able to not having to be homeschooled because you can't risk going out in public and having the powers kind of set off and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. I don't know the
You've
future
got a
of this
film
franchise.
there.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like what I can think of in my mind, it probably isn't to everyone else, but to me it is, all the possibilities of what could have been with a time jump in terms of this film are infinitely more interesting as the actual film that we got. Was it? And I guess like I've said everything I can on the spoilers now, because there really wasn't all that much to say. I'll give my final recommendation on this movie. If you like the first one, you're probably going to like this one too. I know that the 14-year time jump has definitely whetted a lot of people's appetites to see another Incredibles movie, but you're ultimately getting more of the same. If you did want to see like what could have been like a 10-year jump, and maybe a lot of people out there aren't like that. That's just me from like a story and character perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe people out there, and judging by how much money this movie's made already, do just want that escapism of just seeing these characters again, the familiar characters after all this time, and another fun like superhero romp with all these characters. And that's fine if that's all you're in for. You might even love this movie. It's sitting on currently a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, I think.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there that love this movie. For me, I thought it was an incredibly weak villain, a very predictable plot, and it felt like a regression. It felt like a retread of everything that had already been established from the first movie. And I think as a sequel, after 14 years of all that potential, and, you know, like crafting the story and what could be done, I felt like this was the lowest common denominator that Pixar and Disney could put out there. Probably not a lot of thought. I don't want to say not a lot of thought went into it, because I know that it's very difficult to make a movie and to write a movie and everything like that. In terms of animation, you know, there are still some great bits in there. It didn't quite have the same animation style as the first one, which kind of threw me off. But I think there's not really many kids films out at the moment, in all honesty. There's not a lot of movies out at the moment, and that's probably why we haven't been that active on the channel. Usually we do like a movie review every week. There's honestly not a lot of stuff in between that we particularly want to see or we feel like we want to talk about.
Is why we're going to be bringing back Film Club.
Yes.
We've been discussing it. We have the first film set up and everything. We just need to get a date. That's all we need. And once that's arranged, we'll let you guys know, and we'll get back on with that on a weekly basis. And I'm really looking forward to it, because I've picked some really interesting films this time.
And you might notice as well, and I am very guilty of this, apologies guys, the reaction videos have kind of stopped for a while. My reason for that is I did honestly get burnt out doing them. It may not seem like it, because I know that the quality of my camera, the quality of my audio is very humble, but the reaction videos do take a hell of a long time to get made, to get edited, to get converted and compressed and everything like that, and to get uploaded onto the channel. And when a lot of trailers build up, it becomes incredibly difficult. It's almost like you're in a sinking rowboat bailing it out with a bucket sometimes. But this week I'm free. I've been very busy as well. This week I'm freed up, so I'll definitely be getting back to the reaction videos. There's a lot I need to catch up with, and I think this week we're getting some pretty big trailers as well. I know at the weekend we're going to be getting an Aquaman trailer, the brand new DC movie as part of the DCEU, which I'm sure I'll have a lot to talk about and probably get many dislikes on that video. But reaction videos will be coming back, as you just said. Film Club will be returning as well. And more recently, in 2 days' time, we have another episode of Battle of the Brackets. It's without a doubt one of my favorite shows that we have on the channel. And it's a show that we always keep saying we're going to aim to get like one out every month. But the fact of the matter is, it's very difficult to get all of our schedules lined up and everything like that. But we will be back in 2 days' time with a brand new bracket. And I guess I can announce what that bracket is. It will be Worst Movie Sequel. In all honesty, it's a bracket that I thought we would have done long ago, because it seems like it's absolutely rife for possibilities. But definitely check back for then. We'll have times on our Facebook and Twitter and everything like that. Links to those are in the description down below, so be sure to give those a like, be sure to give those a follow. Also hit the bell icon on this channel so you get notified when we do go live. Sometimes we tend to just go live straight away and we don't really announce it beforehand, so make sure you hit that and you'll get like the little blip in the corner to let you know when we go live. I think that's everything announced. Have you got anything to round off with, or?
No, I'm good.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Thank you to everyone in the comments. Brinsley, Seawood Man, Sheila. You guys are awesome. You always jump on every stream. So thank you for commenting. And until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.